Welcome to the Truckers Network radio show on tncradio.live, where we offer the news, weather, traffic, sports, information, and entertainment our commercial drivers want to hear. I'm your host, Shelley Johnson. Speaking of entertainment, good books are something our listeners always enjoy, especially biographies. Mysteries are also some intriguing genres, and there's nothing more intriguing and mysteriously evil than serial killers, especially when it's a detailed biography about a notorious serial killer. Serial killers are not only terrifying and evil, they also continue to elude the authorities who try to apprehend them. Bill Bonin was a notorious freeway serial killer in California who killed 22 males ages 12 to 19 from 1979 to 1980 with the help of 5 accomplices. Without Redemption, Creation and Deeds of Freeway Killer Bill Bonin, his 5 accomplices, and How One Who Escaped Justice is the historical biography of how the murder spree began, what shaped Bill and his terrible accomplices, and why one escaped justice. It's a psychological roadmap that charts the evolution of Bonin's diabolical personality, from an abused child to sexual predator to serial killer. The book does an extensive investigation of all the documents surrounding his background, his childhood, his war service, time in mental health and penal institutions, and interviews that clinical psychologist Dr. Vonda Pelto did with Bonin and 2 of his accomplices. The book explores in detail the inner workings of Bonin's mind and how he viewed the world. With me today is Michael Butler, the co-author of Without Redemption, who wrote the detailed biography with Dr. Vonda Pelto. Welcome, Michael. Thank you for being on the show with me.
Oh, well, thank you. It's an honor to be on your show. I really appreciate it.
And we really appreciate this insight and having you on the show, where we can take a peek at a diabolical mind and maybe make some sense out of senseless. Serial killers are such a mystery, and this book is a page-turner. It's a terrifying look into the mind of a diabolical killer. For our listeners who aren't familiar with the case, who was Bill Bonin and what did he do? If you could kind of maybe give us a brief summary on the chain of events that terrified California.
Okay. Well, Bonin was raised in Connecticut, but he ended up in Southern California in the early 60s. And what happened was, after serving in Vietnam and then getting in trouble a number of times, spending a lot of time in prison, from August 1979 till June 11th, 1980, when he was arrested, Bonin essentially murdered 22 teenage boys in 10 months.
Wow.
During that time. And during that time also, he was in custody 3 different times. So discounting the time he was serving in a local county jail for other offenses, he pretty much averaged 1 victim a week.
Wow.
Or close to it. And in fact, he ended up killing 2 in one day, twice. So it's a very, and the thing is, now he didn't torture the kids like we would think. There's so many horrific shows about Dahmer and all these guys, very torture sadistic. He didn't have any of his victims in his actual possession for more than a few hours. And he beat them up, he raped them, and then he strangled them. And then he discarded them. So, and he did this all in his van for the most part.
Wow.
A couple of them were at houses, one of an accomplice, one at his mother's house.
Oh, my goodness.
Yes. And then he was arrested in June of 1980, and that ended the murder spree.
Why did they call him the Freeway Killer?
Yeah, this was a moniker affixed to him by a journalist by the name of J.J. Maloney. Now, Maloney was a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist who actually had served time in Kansas for murder, but he educated himself in prison, got an early release, and became a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist in Kansas City. And then he moved to Orange County, California, and started working for the Orange County Register. During his time there, which coincided with Bonin's murders. And also, there were 2 or 3 other serial killers operating in Southern California at the same time. One of them was Randy Kraft. And so this was an extension of a series of homosexually oriented murders that had been going on since 1973. So Bonin fit into that profile. And Maloney realized that this was a big story, and he did some research. He consulted a forensic pathologist, and he came to the conclusion there was a serious serial killer, and the police were holding back the information because what Bonin was doing was back page stories. Mm-hmm. And also, Bonin spread his victims out way wide. He dumped them in a 150-mile radius, from Bakersfield to San Diego and Palm Springs to Malibu. So he was very smart that way. And he discarded all their clothing and all their ID and everything. So there was no evidence at all, no hard evidence. So Maloney, in March 24 of 1980, after Bonin had killed over 14 or 15, but they had no idea who Bonin was, he broke the story with the help of his editors, and he named him the Freeway Killer.
Okay.
Because some of his victims were dumped next to freeways, and he did it, and it stuck. And then every day after that, the OC Register ran front page stories, and that caused the story to be really big and forced law enforcement to admit what was going on at the time.
Good. Oh my goodness.
Yes.
Not making that a priority and not being forthcoming with the public. That was terrible.
Well, and remember, it was a different time, 1979. There was 3 major networks. There was newspapers.
Sure.
And these guys were making the police look bad.
Right.
So they, were doing what they could to figure it out, but they didn't want a panicked public, and they didn't want the politicians breathing down their neck. So they played it close to the vest. And then after that, slowly, at first they wouldn't admit what was going on, and slowly they were forced to then go into interagency cooperation with LA County and Orange County Sheriff's Departments and LAPD Robbery Homicide Division, which is a very politically powerful department within LAPD, had to admit what was going on and cooperate further. But still, even after that, for 2 more months, they had no idea who Bonin was. He was a name that was unknown to them until they got a lucky tip.
And of course, back then, various police departments didn't share information so well.
Well, they did, but remember, it was teletype and paper.
Yeah.
And fax, or not even fax. They didn't even have fax then. So it was the phone and the teletype and sending paper files between agencies. And Southern California, remember, LA is a huge area with a lot of small cities within it, and then big counties surrounding the cities.
Sure.
So the victims were dumped in 6 different counties: Riverside, Kern, San Diego, Ventura, and LA County. So they were all over the place. And like I said, Bonin wasn't stupid. He left very little evidence behind.
How did he enlist the help of 5 accomplices?
Okay. Well, and this goes back to the exploration of Bonin the manipulator, Bonin the clever sociopath. He was a smart guy. He had a very difficult childhood, abuse, whatnot, sexual, physical, you name it. But he was a smart guy. And when he got back from Vietnam, he got in trouble. And part of what he did because he then spent 9 years in various mental hospitals, mental hospital prisons, and in prison over 9 years. And he became a very good manipulator during those 9 years. He cleverly manipulated doctors, lawyers, judges, social workers, probation officers, you name it. he learned how to play the game and to shape shift his way through those processes. And so when he then left prison finally, and that whole story of how those 9 years is very well documented, and it really shows how clever he was, because we have all the documents with his psych reports and the reports from the psychiatrists who were overseeing his custody and whatnot. And then then he preyed on younger men who were easily manipulated, and he slowly drew them into his web and got them to do things for him. They became his friend. He helped them. People who were kind of lost, runaway guys that he knew who he could manipulate. He was good at it. That's how he did it.
Wow. Bill Bonin was quite the con man. He was able to create a lot of victims. I hate to interrupt, but we have to go to break here. We'll be back with more details from the book Without Redemption about Bill Bonin, the Freeway Killer. Stay tuned for more on the Truckers Network radio show after this short break. TNCRadio.live is proud to carry the Steve Summers Overnight Drive Show. TNCRadio.live is dedicated to commercial drivers. We offer the news, traffic, and weather you need, and the entertainment, sports, talk, music, and celebrity interviews you want to hear 24/7. We have original shows and trucker podcasts that feature some of your favorites, like Ice Road Alex Debogorski and America's Truckin' Sweetheart Marcia Campbell. TNCRadio.live is convenient and designed for professional drivers. The best part is we're free, and you can listen anywhere you are on the road. With just one tap, you can tune into Steve Summers and us right on your phone. Simply download our app by going to app.tncradio.live. That's app.tncradio.live. Did you know that 80% of America's communities rely on trucking alone to deliver their goods? The trucking industry keeps America running thanks to the 3.6 million professional truck drivers traveling over 300 billion miles a year. Industry movement Trucking Moves America Forward, or TMAF, tells the story of trucking and its positive impact on our economy, communities, and lives. Learn how you can be part of the industry movement working to build a strong image of trucking by visiting truckingmovesamerica.com. Welcome back to the Truckers Network radio show on TNCRadio.live. I'm Shelley Johnson, and I'm talking with Michael Butler, who co-wrote the book Without Redemption with Dr. Vonda Pelto about freeway killer Bill Bonin and the biggest mass murder case in California history. Michael, what I find shocking is how Bill was able to lure accomplices in to help do his dirty work. I keep saying diabolical, but he was exactly that. What did he get these accomplices to do exactly?
Well, they would go out hunting for a victim. So they would go to Hollywood.
So they knew what they were doing. They knew that they were looking.
Well, yes. Now, a couple of them were drawn in without really knowing, not believing that this was going to happen. And then when it happened, they were so scared of him that they just went along for the ride and saw no way out except to help and to participate. Now, a couple of the others, like Vernon Butts, who was with him from the beginning. That's one of the things we also show, how that relationship with Vernon Butts and Bill Bonin was really the spark that lit the fire, because they had known each other for not a long period of time, but maybe a year or so before it started. And Vernon Butts was into occult stuff and, dark arts type of stuff with his fiance. And he had mystery parties where they would hunt for murder, solve murders and whatnot. And so they talked a lot about all this kind of death stuff. And then one night in August, after Bonin bought a new van, or a used van new to him, they got to talking. And one thing led to another. And before you knew it, they had done the first one. And what happened was Bonin discovered that he liked it.
Mm.
And during the murder spree, and also it was in the beginning, it was sex and power and murder, right?
Mm-hmm.
During the murder spree, Bonin realized, I don't care about the sex anymore. I just want to do this thing. Having the power of life and death over these kids, easy victims, was what kept him going.
Mm-hmm.
And at some points, he didn't even rape them anymore. He just strangled them. Most of them were strangled with a tire iron and a t-shirt,
Wow.
twisting the tire. And some were killed in other ways that are detailed. And in the book, we were lucky enough to have Bonin's diaries, which had been hidden for 4 decades. And he wrote all these stories down. And he wrote about the time after he was arrested when all the deals were being made with the prosecutors and the accomplices and the lawyers, and the media was swirling around, because it was a huge story in Southern California.
Mm-hmm.
It was the biggest mass murder case in Southern California history when he was arrested and going to trial.
Was he trying to rival Charles Manson or something?
He didn't know what he was, it just happened.
Okay.
And I'll tell you, one of the coincidences which we discovered, when the night he was arrested, he was having sex with a boy in his van in Hollywood, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the police had been following him. They had been shadowing him based on that tip. And that was when he got arrested, June 11th, 1980. The kid in the van with him, who also had a record, he was Sharon Tate's nephew.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. But he escaped. The police saved him, and he probably would have been killed.
Wow.
And Bonin wrote in his diaries, can you imagine what they would have said if I would have killed him?
Well, the fact that he kept such detailed diaries, he must have been really proud of what he'd done.
See, now the diaries were written after the fact.
Okay.
So he gets arrested, he's in jail, and he's awaiting trial. And when they arrested him, they didn't know anything about any of the accomplices. They knew nothing.
Mm-hmm.
They barely knew what he had done. They had a good idea, but they had no physical evidence. They had nothing to go on. The DA refused to charge him with murder when he was first arrested because they had nothing. And it took 10 months from the time he's arrested till everything played out, when they had the accomplices and the deals were made to have the accomplices testify against Bonin.
Mm-hmm.
So that was when he started writing those things. His lawyer, his personal lawyer who had represented him previous to the murders, gave him legal pads, and he kept a daily journal of what was going on in the jail. So in the book also, you get all these scenes in the jail of like the other inmates on his row lighting mattresses on fire, the fights between other inmates, 2 deputy sheriffs almost coming to blows on his row because they had a disagreement. So you get all these slice of jail life stories,
sure,
on top of the machinations going on behind the scenes with everything. So that adds, and some of the stories are hilarious, and some are kind of depressing, of course. And so he wrote them then. And what he would do is he would write them, and then his attorney would come and he would give them to his attorney for safekeeping, because Bonin thought he could use them to get a deal to avoid the death penalty. So that's why he was writing them. And then also he was writing the daily journal as a means to have something possibly later on to use for whatever purposes.
Okay, so everything he did had a purpose, no doubt.
He was winging it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he wasn't much of a planner.
Mm-hmm.
He was just winging
a spontaneous psychopath.
Yes. Yeah. He was winging a lot of stuff. And like Vonda, our co-author, She had sessions with Bonin in the
Yes.
jail.
I wanted to talk about that. She did extensive interviews and really gained some valuable insights. She interviewed him as well as two of his accomplices, right?
And a bunch of others. She
Okay.
had what happened was Vernon Butts, Bonin's accomplice and main accomplice. He was ripe for a deal to testify against Bonin, but he was also an emotionally shaky person, and he wasn't physically intimidating. He was tall and thin, and he killed himself in jail in January of 81.
Okay.
January of 81, right?
Mm-hmm.
So prosecutors are like livid. They've lost their star witness who would probably testify and get him a Bonin death penalty. Bonin death penalty was what the prosecutors wanted and needed politically, professionally, morally. So what happened was the sheriff department and the mental health department in the jail, LA County Men's Jail is one of the biggest jails in the world, 5,000 inmates. So they lose this guy and so what they did was they brought in Vonda Pelto 9 months later, in August of 81, to not counsel. She was a clinical psychologist, but she wasn't licensed yet. She'd just gotten her PhD. A single mother, 2 young daughters, a good-looking woman, and they bring her in and they created a position that had never existed before. She was there to chat up the guys awaiting trial. Hillside Strangler, 2 of them, Buono and Bianchi.
Mm-hmm.
The Sunset Strip Slayer, Douglas Clark, who decapitated women,
Right.
kept their heads in a freezer. John Holmes, the porn star, he was in there for the Wonderland murders. They were holding him there because they wanted him to testify against Eddie Nash. Bill Bonin, his accomplices. And her job was chat them up, keep them on an emotional, even keel. Tell us what's going on with them so that if we think one of them is going to go over the edge, we can do something to prevent it. She wasn't supposed to counsel them. She's not supposed to analyze them. And her office was a cell on the floor
Oh, wow.
with the inmates, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they had free access to her. Whenever they wanted to see her, they could see her. So that was the atmosphere in which she saw Bonin. And his trial was slated to start about a month after she got there. It ended up starting 2 or 3 months afterwards. And so from August 81 till March of 82, when the final verdict was given that Bonin got the death penalty, she saw him during that time, those 6 months. And he told her all kinds of stuff, just like all the other guys told them about. They loved telling her about the murders. And this experience, this job, deeply affected her emotionally, spiritually, physically.
Oh, I bet.
She started becoming a very hard drinking, promiscuous, emotionally spent person. And it really, nightmares,
Mm-hmm.
And then when she wrote her first book about her whole experience in the jail, every time she tried to write it, the nightmares would come back and she had to stop. So it took her 10 years to finally finish the first book called Without Remorse.
Yeah.
And so she had sessions with Bonin, and they were interesting and insightful. And a number of those are spread throughout the book. He told her about one of the murders that's in the book. He talking about his childhood. Those are spread in different places. And then also sessions in the last section of the book when he's talking to her about all kinds of things. So those are very interesting. And it gives real insight into, from her perspective as a professional, clinical psychologist.
This is beyond intriguing. I can't imagine what it was like to talk to somebody like Bill Bonin. We happen to have a soundbite of some of her insight after talking to Bill Bonin. It's an intriguing interview she did, an analysis of Bill Bonin. Let's listen to that.
Your job was to sit and counsel them, look for signs of suicide. What was
That was all.
What was your mandate? To look to see if they were going to commit suicide.
Just keep these bleepers alive. That was it.
So you weren't trying to help them, really?
No.
You weren't trying to give them psychological counseling to understand their inner demons?
Nada. No confidentiality, because my door was always open and the deputies were always around. And so it was just, mental health was embarrassed, and so was the sheriff's department. The attorney general was mad as hell.
Oh, over the guy who had killed himself?
Yeah, because he was going to testify against Bill Bonin, the other freeway killer, that they really, really wanted the most. So when Butts killed himself, he couldn't testify, of course.
Yeah, we've all heard of William Bonin, of course. James
he was
Monroe.
Mine. I saw William Bonin and there were 5 of them actually. Butts had already killed himself, but I saw Bonin every day almost in Jim Monroe and Miley and Pugh.
Were these all the guys that killed young men, or were that?
Yeah, 21.
21?
Yeah,
21.
Let's talk about Bill Bonin. He killed 21?
Yep, he and his 4 buddies.
Right, and they were all teenagers?
From age 12 to age 19.
Right, and they thought they had killed dozens more on top of it.
Yeah. In fact, I'm still in contact with Monroe, who is housed up in Mule Creek, and he has recently told me that actually Bonin killed several more. Interesting thing, John and Ken. A guy has been put to death, has been given the death penalty out in Orange County for killing a kid named Jamie Lee Trotter. Recently, I got a letter from Jim Monroe, one of the freeway killers, telling me that he and actually Bonin had killed Jamie Lee Trotter and not Crummell, who is on death row for it.
Do you think he said that just to get attention, or you really believe that he did?
I believe him, because he gave me too many details about how he, Butts, and Bonin picked this kid up and what they did to the kid.
And this guy that you said was already convicted of the crimes had nothing to do with Bonin and Monroe?
Right.
Had he killed other people, though?
Yes, he had. And
oh, okay. Well, then it's okay.
Yeah, so, that's what I figured.
As long as there's some rough justice.
Now,
I've given up on exact justice.
You once asked Bonin.
Well, see, good old Crummell had killed some kid in Arizona and got off on a technicality.
Well, there you go.
So I don't think
Yeah, what comes around goes around.
Too willing to let this dude off.
You once asked Bonin, how does it feel to kill a kid?
I did. I couldn't even believe it. Bonin said, well, he said, I didn't really feel anything. I said, even when these kids were crying and screaming and begging and pleading, even the 12-year-old kid, and he said, no, I didn't feel anything. And I could not understand that kind of thinking. I mean, that's just totally bizarre.
That's a psychopath.
He actually killed because he was tense and nervous, and it made him relax?
Yeah.
Like a cigarette or something?
Well, thank goodness that other people kill themselves with cigarettes.
It speaks to the compulsive nature in his brain wiring,
right.
Because people will walk around and be tense and nervous and will relax with a cigarette or a drink, and because he had no conscience at all,
right?
Because he was truly a psychopath, a sociopath, the killing did give him some temporary relief of all the tension that he's...
Yeah, but then he said after he killed the kid, or when the kid was begging, I said, did it feel like killing an animal? And he said, no, I have more feeling for an animal.
Wow.
This guy was truly evil.
And why did he open up to you?
I saw him the day that he was given the death penalty. And so he had pled guilty actually to 21, and I have his confession actually. And so then at that point I think he just wanted to talk about it. And not because he felt guilty or no remorse, nothing to do with that. He liked to relive the crimes. And he went into overdrive.
Was he proud of them?
Oh, yeah.
Was it a sexual thing for him, some sort of a sexual release? Because I read he also said that he would fantasize all day long about killing somebody.
Right. At first it was sexual release, and then later on he just loved the power. He liked that, having it over life and death.
Did you think he was ever thinking about killing himself, or that was never a factor?
Oh, no. He was much too narcissistic. Nah.
Now that's the sort of stuff nightmares are made of. We have to take another break, but don't go away. We've got more to discuss about the book Without Redemption, about freeway killer Bill Bonin. Stay tuned to the Truckers Network radio show on tncradio.live. The trucking industry keeps America running thanks to the 3.36 million professional truck drivers who deliver everyday goods to 80% of American communities who rely on trucking for that last mile. The industry represents a diverse group with nearly half of drivers at 42% as minorities. Trucking Moves America Forward, or TNAF, educates the public on the essentiality of trucking by telling the story of trucking and its positive impact on our economy, communities, and lives. Learn how you can join the industry movement by visiting truckingmovesamerica.com. Welcome back to the Truckers Network radio show on tncradio.live. I'm Shelley Johnson, and I'm talking with Michael Butler. He co-wrote the book Without Redemption with Dr. Vonda Pelto. It's about freeway killer Bill Bonin and the biggest mass murder case in California history. Michael, I really admire your co-author's courage in speaking with Bill Bonin and people like the Hillside Strangler, Sunset Strip Slayer, and others while they were in prison. That'd be intimidating to most people. She had to have gained some tremendous insight into the diabolical mind of a psychopathic killer with all the different people she spoke with. And I could see where she'd end up just an emotional wreck, because that takes you on the dark side. You know?
Absolutely. It is. And she still has a mouth like a longshoreman. But she did gain a lot of insight. And also she came to the conclusion, as the book says in the title, these guys are without redemption. They're beyond saving, as far as she's concerned.
Did she gain insight into what makes somebody into such a monster?
There's so many different things that go into it, so many forces in a person's life that send them in a certain direction. And that's one of the things that we explore in the book, because we go from Bonin's early childhood all the way through to the various abuses that took place during his life, his overall family structure, which was bad. His parents were, didn't provide a protective, loving environment for their children.
Right.
And Bonin started killing when he was 33, 32, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it took a long time for that personality to emerge, and many different things. One of the things he said in many interviews with various psychologists and even Vonda was, okay, he went to war in Vietnam. He was a helicopter gunner on Chinook. They were big helicopters, and they flew into hot zones to pull out wounded and fly in supplies. Now, it was during the Tet Offensive.
Right.
He became inured to violence, and one thing he learned that he used later is when he would see Vietnamese soldiers that they captured being restrained and tortured or beat up for information. And this became incorporated into what he did later. So this experience definitely had an impact on his personality.
Did it give him a sexual rush or something? Because I think I've read that serial killers actually get that kind of rush when they kill people and torture them. And
yes, it's a power thing. It's definitely, these guys, a lot of them have no power within their own lives.
Right.
So this is a way for them to exercise power. Bonin is exercising power over life and death, the ultimate decision of a human to take another human's life. This is the ultimate power, and this is Bonin exercising that power. It's hard for me to speak about other serial killers in general, but from writing this book, we can definitely see that component, and it becomes stronger. And he says, if they didn't catch me, I would have kept doing it. I couldn't stop.
It is an addiction in a way for these people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He would think about it. And also, he was a truck driver. And during the last part, during the last part, he worked at a place in Montebello, California, in Los Angeles, where they would deliver trucks to companies that needed trucks, or they would pick up trucks for companies that needed trucks brought back somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So he spent a lot of time on the road. And I tell you, when he got arrested, the detectives were very interested in all those trips that he went on, because he often took routes different than the other drivers coming back. If they went to New York to drive 4 trucks back, all the 3 of them would go on one route and Bonin would take his own route home.
Okay.
And they never figured out that he did anything during those trips. He might have been picking up guys for sex, who knows.
Mm-hmm.
But during the murder spree, he picked up kids and had sex with them and let them go. There was a number of, he said, at least a half a dozen that he picked up and let go.
So he didn't feel the desire to kill every time.
No.
Mm-hmm.
And he said those were the lucky ones.
Interesting.
Yes.
Wow.
And also it was often opportunity. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
He's out hunting, or he's just driving around and not intending to do anything. But then he comes upon somebody hitchhiking who fits a description of someone he likes or would be a possible good victim.
Mm-hmm.
And there you go. Opportunity knocks. And then the person, rather than saying, no, I'm not getting in your car, they make the wrong decision and they get in.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's it. Once he's got you in, he's got the doors rigged so you can't open from the inside, and they're trapped.
Wow.
Yeah. So they're trapped. So sometimes it was just plain bad luck, bad decision, wrong place, wrong time, answered the question with the wrong answer.
Sure.
And it happened. Other ones were hustlers up in Hollywood, young kids who ran away, young boys who were thrown out of the house or ran away from their house, and they were living on the streets of Hollywood hustling. He would go up there and troll Hollywood Boulevard, Santa Monica Boulevard. In the areas he knew, there were hustlers. A number of them became victims. So it was often just opportunity, bad luck, whatever. Sometimes he'd be driving around and he'd be ready to give up, and lo and behold, someone pops up on his radar screen right in front of him. That's it.
Did he have a certain type he preferred?
Yes, just young, white, teenage boys.
Okay. Wow.
Period. That was what he liked. And also, there were some people he tried to recruit, that were like, get that away from me. And they would never saw him again. We're like, I know this guy's out of his mind. I'd never talking to him again.
Mm-hmm.
So, but then there were the others that were susceptible to his manipulations.
What was his personality like?
Very smart, charming. Vonda said in the book, if I saw this guy on the street, I would never know he's a serial killer. Nice guy. She said, I felt during the conversations in the book, she writes, I felt sorry for him. I felt like sometimes I wanted to comfort him. And then I remembered. So he's charming, personable. People that knew him well liked him. During his jail time, when he's about to be charged with 20 murders, he got engaged to be married.
Oh, Lord. Oh.
Yes.
Oh.
So this is a charming, smart, he could be very giving, very nice to people, and a lot of people. And this is also an element of serial killers as well. Lawrence Bittaker he killed 5 women, raped a bunch and killed 5 with another guy, Norris. And he was in there the same time. Him and Bonin became buddies. And when I looked at the timeline of what they did, it's exactly the same. And one of the things that stood out as a complete similarity is all the people that knew them well thought they were loving, giving people. Bittaker and Bonin were the same. And they each had a van, and they each gave it a nickname. And they each got out of the same prison, CMC, at the same time before the killings. And they each started a month apart. Wow. And ended a few months apart, and ended up at death row together in San Quentin.
Master manipulators.
Yes.
So evil.
Absolutely charming. Look at Ted Bundy.
Oh, I was thinking about Ted Bundy. Yeah, good looking. You never would have thought that anything was wrong with him. And of course, he lured women because he was cute.
He was charming.
Yeah.
Yes.
Michael, you sent me some excerpts of interviews here that your co-author, Dr. Vonda Pelto, did about some of the insights she gained after interviewing some of these serial killers in prison. For ease of listening, I put them together. It really is thought-provoking and scary. Let's listen.
Were all these serial killers on drugs?
No. In fact, the trash bag murderer was, when he killed those two people and raped the woman, he was freebasing. Ken Bianchi and Angelo did some drugs, but not a great deal. They were the hillsides. The Freeway killers, Bonin didn't even drink, and he was the main man. He was the one who corrupted 4 other kids and got them to come along and kill with him. No, for the most part. See, in order to be a serial killer, you've got to be pretty sharp. To be a serial killer, you've got to kill at least 3 people and not get detected. And so in order to do that, you've got to be pretty bright. They're not stupid. They're not crazy like psychotics. And for the most part, they're not on drugs or alcohol.
They're machines. It sounds like a machine.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you think that society should waste the money on giving them therapists and counselors, or should they give them the rope and razor blades to kill themselves?
Well, see, I like the idea of giving them the ropes and the razor blade. I like that idea. However, because we are a civilized society, we don't do that. And see, when I saw them, it was not in any way for therapy. It was self-serving for the mental health department and the sheriff's department, because the Attorney General, Van de Kamp at that time, got a tremendous amount of heat that Vernon Butts was able to kill himself under the protection of the Sheriff's Department in the jail, and particularly since he was going to testify against the man they wanted the most. So my job was not therapy. It was only to talk to these people and make sure they didn't off themselves.
So they could stand trial. And
exactly.
That's almost like grandstanding for the government.
Yeah. It was to cover their butts.
Mm-hmm.
The deputies and mental health. Yeah.
It's incredible.
John and Ken Show, John Cobelt and Ken Champeau with Vonda Pelto. She's written a book, Without Remorse, the story of the woman who kept Los Angeles serial killers alive. This is true. After one serial killer committed suicide and screwed up a case because they needed his testimony, the L.A. County Sheriff's Department said, we got to have somebody talking to these guys to make sure that they don't kill themselves before trial until we get what we need out of them.
Late 70s, early 80s, and she one of the reasons that she said that she took so long to write this book is that she was having nightmares for a long time. Vonda, what was that about?
Well, I would dream about some of these different killers. I have to tell you, the first day I walked into the jail, I was raised Southern Baptist. I was such a naive little chick. And I walked into the jail with the deputy, and my office was on the 2nd floor. I walked along, and there was this good-looking man, and I was a single, horny chick. I was kind of young still, divorced. And here's this good-looking dude on the phone, and I thought, my God, I'd date him, if he were single and out in the public. And so I said to the deputy, hey, who's that guy? And the deputy said, that's Ken Bianchi. He's the Hillside Strangler.
Yeah. Nice choice on your part.
So much for my intellect as being a young psychologist.
Nice radar there. There's always women who go after the bad guys. I guess you're one of them, huh?
Yeah. Well, after that, I didn't go after him anymore.
Was there any depth to these people, or were they all just obsessive, compulsive,
narcissistic?
Was there anything interesting about them in other ways?
I think the only thing interesting about them was what great manipulators they were. Ken Bianchi, the Hillside Strangler, would pat me on the shoulder sometime and say, oh, Doc, you work too hard. You shouldn't have to work. You should have a man to take care of you. It was so thinly veiled, this tremendous manipulation they were all capable of.
So you could see how they could lure their victims.
You betcha. And the Sunset Killer, a good-looking dude. He was the one who chopped the heads off, kept them in the fridge, and then did sex things with the heads later on.
No.
I don't know this guy.
That must be before our time.
Oh.
The Sunset. How many people did he kill?
They think maybe 50.
He had heads stacked up in the refrigerator?
Yeah, and he had his girlfriend who did some of the killings with him, put makeup on the heads.
Oh.
Well,
men, women?
There's
only so much you can do with a head sexually, but there are things you can do.
Men or women?
Women. all women.
Women, and he had his girlfriend applying makeup to the heads.
Well,
Right.
he wanted him to look good, John, for the
Right.
night.
I mean, after all, you want your date to look good.
Yeah, no,
Oh, jeez.
you'd think he could have just gotten one of those blow-up dolls instead.
Well,
but
I think so, but just
How do you do a follow-up to that? I mean, there are no words to describe what these people do. It's massive, evil insanity. What made Bonin tick?
Bonin is an interesting character, and I've read from his diaries. You really get a look at how he thinks,
Yeah.
and how he also, as you said in the book, he covered up for one of his accomplices, and the reason he did it is because he loved him.
Okay.
And he also did it to get. So there were 3 reasons he covered up: love, revenge, and spite.
Interesting.
Yes, and those are all chronicled in why, how, when, because it's a very complex little story of when he met this person, what they did together, the other people involved, and it all starts to fall into place during the time when Bonin's in custody and this person is arrested, but he's arrested for a murder he didn't commit with Bonin, but and then he goes and does certain things to help this guy. It's because he knows who really did it with him. And it's a very complicated little scenario, and we have noodled it all out. And one of the other aspects in the book that I didn't realize till after I had written the whole book, one day in the midst of the murder spree, March 24th, 1980, and I mentioned it earlier, that was the day the article came out naming him as a freeway killer, right? Saying there was a freeway killer out there, naming him.
Right.
Well, that day, 4 people all crossed paths. Bonin, this guy Scott Frazier, this guy Eric, and Billy Pugh, who ended up killing with him that night. Frazier was a friend he partied at his apartment. Eric was the guy he loved. William Pugh was a kid he met at Frazier's that day, who helped him kill that night. And those crossroads that happened on that day have a massive effect on what happened 9 months later when Eric is arrested. And all these coincidences come into play. The other guy, Pugh and Frazier, all those coincidences come into play during the time when he's in prison, he's in custody awaiting trial, and have a huge impact on everything that happens. And it's so hard to explain because you have to really read it in order to figure out all the angles. And I didn't get it completely and realize it completely until I'd finished the book, and even after I'd edited it twice.
Wow.
And then I realized, oh my God, that day, if those people don't cross paths in that way on that day, all this other stuff doesn't happen. It's like when you see those movies, when all these, their paths cross and it affects all this stuff at a certain moment. That is exactly what it is. And it's true life. It's not fiction. And I didn't realize it until the very end. And I went back and I put in the book, I put in the little kind of like placards to show you why this is so important to remember this day. Sure. And then later on, and I go, and remember, it all goes back to that day. And then later I remind the reader again, remember March 24th. You have to remember March 24th. That's why this is happening.
The book certainly takes so many twists and turns. It's a psychological thriller. It's an insight into a diabolical mind, and you detail all of these different circumstances. You even solve 2 40-year-old murder mysteries, which is
because
too.
we know who helped him, and the detectives knew it. They knew Eric was involved, but they couldn't prove it. His name was he was never charged with anything afterwards. And no one knew which ones it was. But we got the diaries.
Wow.
So we solved the mystery of which ones he was involved in. And Bonin dangled that fact in front of the detectives' noses. because he was still trying to make a deal to avoid the death penalty.
What ended up happening with Bill Bonin?
He was executed. Well, and remember, in California at that time, Manson was given the death penalty in 1970, right? 1975, the California Supreme Court struck down the death penalty. And so Manson retroactively gets life without parole, no death penalty. Fast forward 1980, when Bonin is tried, the death penalty is back into effect because the California legislature repassed the law. So the death penalty is back into effect. Gas chamber death penalties are back. Mm-hmm. And so Bonin gets the death penalty, but also between the time he got it to the time they did it, the gas chamber was ruled cruel and unusual. So Bonin was the first lethal injection execution in California in February of 96. So 14 years after the fact. Now, California is basically abolished death row. Gavin Newsom has just said no more ever for whatever. That's their thing.
Sure. Where do people find your book? This is definitely something that is a page turner.
Well, thank you. It's on Amazon or BarnesandNoble.com. Either one. It's available in softcover, hardcover, and Kindle. And it's available softcover, Barnes & Noble, as well as the Nook at BarnesandNoble.com.
And what do people look up? Can they just look up the title?
Yeah, if they just... Also, our website is withoutredemption.com.
Okay.
Which is easy to remember. They can just put in Without Redemption and then say Michael Butler or Vonda Pelto. There are quite a few books named Without Redemption that are out there. So they can find it if they go. All the links are there at withoutredemption.com. And if they use either one of the authors in conjunction with Without Redemption, it'll pop right up. It definitely, I wrote it using great biographies as a standard for me. I read a guy, Andrew Roberts, who wrote a biography of Napoleon and Churchill, and I took his style of historical biography and tried to transmit that into this book. So it moves quickly. We don't try and dawdle around too much. Lots of detail, lots of official documents, lots of newspaper citing. We use a lot of newspapers articles also to tell the story as it moves along. And there's pictures in there too. Pictures of Bonin's house, Vonda at the jail, sitting on Charles Manson's bed.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
Wow.
Her photo ID of what she did to get in the jail and whatnot. It's a fun book. Well, it's not fun, but it's interesting.
Yes, it's a chilling account, but it offers so many perspectives that it keeps. And
also, you get cultural snapshots because, his time in the mental hospital, you realize that societal norms at the time are dictating the treatment he gets.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's a cultural snapshot as well, all along the way.
I really appreciate you being on the show, Michael. This is definitely something people need to read if they're into this type of book. And certainly serial killers, I think they are just a mystery, and they're really the evil among us. That they're the ghoulish part of humanity. Nobody really understands.
Yeah, you bet. You said that very well.
I appreciate you being on the show, Michael. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was a joy. I really appreciate it.
I've been speaking with Michael Butler, the co-author of Without Redemption. Definitely check out the book. This is the Truckers Network Radio Show with Shelley Johnson. Stay tuned for more right here on tncradio.live. Thank you for listening to another great interview on tncradio.live and the Truckers Network Radio Show. All of the material you hear on tncradio.live, on our website, our broadcasts, or our podcasts are copyrighted. There can be no distribution without the express consent of tncradio.live and its partners. For inquiries, write us at info@tncradio.live.